gotten here, you've downloaded, you've tuned into our Sesquicentennial celebration netcast. And I say us because I've got all you guys in the chat room here with me too, helping me celebrate. So also this just kind of happened to coincide with the 4th anniversary of my netcast. The very first netcast number, well, 1, was recorded March 16th of 2009. 4 years and 2 days ago, I recorded the first one of these train wrecks, and been going strong ever since. Now, obviously, I've got quite a lot put into this. I've got a monitor that's shut off. I've got a sheet hanging from the wall. I've got a bare patch of wall over there that's not covered up with a sheet. So I've got a lot going on for me here. It's tough to believe that the very first one of these 4 years ago was recorded about 20 foot that way with the sheet hanging from the ceiling next to a cat box. I've come a long way. I was wearing a headset. It was terrible. Every time I do one of these anniversary shows, I think about getting that first one out and watching it. Man, was it painful. Holy cow. So we have gone through, this is the 3rd version of SharePoint that these have covered. The first one, the first episode was talking about SharePoint 2007, and then we've gone through the whole 2010 cycle, and now we're in SharePoint 2013. It's been pretty crazy. So number 150, and here's to at least 15 or 16 more of these. Tonight's netcast was recorded March 16th, 2009. And oddly enough, I'm in my basement. Now, if you guys remember last week, I warned you that I would be recording from San Antonio somewhere, and that didn't quite work out. So what was supposed to happen there was I was supposed to go down to San Antonio this week for training, do some SharePoint 2013 training down at the castle, and yesterday my flight from Des Moines to Atlanta was delayed by an hour because apparently the plane that was going to fly from Des Moines to Atlanta sprung a leak, and Delta didn't want to fly us around on a plane without oil in it. So they sent for another plane, but that plane put the flight behind an hour, and I only had an hour and 22 minutes between my flights, and so they didn't think I'd make my connecting flight. Not a big deal, right? Just catch another flight, go through another thing. Well, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but this week is spring break, and you can't beg, borrow, or steal a plane seat going to Texas for anything right now. They are all full. So Delta said, yeah, we can get you from Des Moines to Atlanta, albeit an hour late, and then you're going to have to wait there at least 24 hours for the first open seat from Atlanta to San Antonio. So I spent about an hour trying to fly into any other place in Texas, Houston, because Texas is pretty small. If you fly into any place in Texas, you can pretty much drive any place else in Texas in like 5-6 hours. So I tried to fly into Houston and Dallas and Austin, and there was nothing doing. Apparently everybody else is in Texas this week except for me. I'm the only one that's not in Texas this week. So because of that, I couldn't get down there to teach the class this week, and then so here I am with my netcast, doing it here from the basement for this week. So their loss, the class's loss, well, maybe their gain. Everybody wins. So Mark in the chat room is asking, well, we got a lot of Marks in the chat room tonight. Mark Gam in the chat room is asking, they're not stuck with Shane, are they? Right now, they're stuck with Steven and me Skyping in a couple times a day. They'll be stuck with Shane starting Wednesday. So Shane and I were going to split the week. I was going to do Monday, Tuesday, and part of Wednesday, and then Shane was going to do the other half of Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And then I just canceled. I just didn't show up. Yeah, it was pretty rough. So I spent an hour yesterday on the phone with Delta trying to get down there, and it just wasn't going to happen. So. I apologize to anybody who was in the class that was hoping to see me, and congratulations to anybody in the class who was hoping not to see me, because that all worked. But again, so here I am in the basement doing the netcast with you folks. Speaking of the class, I was going to be teaching that at the Rackspace headquarters down in San Antonio, affectionately referred to as the Castle. We had some internal folks in there. Why were internal rackers taking SharePoint training? Because at Rackspace we do an awful lot of SharePoint. You can go to SharePoint911.com or Rackspace.com/SharePoint to find out about all of our great SharePoint offerings. and they are the ones that make all of this magic happen. They didn't buy that $14 sheet. That came out of the Klindt Girl College Fund, but everything else, the fancy microphone that you guys can't see and all that, they paid for. So thank them. Go out there and say hey. On to production notes. So I've been making some changes here the last couple of weeks, which always makes for fun production notes. Last week, I don't know if you'll notice if you did the download of the video looked a little fuzzier than normal, a little grainy, not the high quality that you're used to seeing. It didn't really capture the shine on my forehead as well as it normally does. That's because the week before I was in San Francisco, and I took all my stuff with me. When I hooked it all up last week, I hooked up the wrong webcam, and the webcam that I recorded with was the old webcam that can't do 30 frames a second, and I didn't realize it when I started the recording, and so it was recorded at 15 frames a second, which now looks like stop animation anymore. It was all jittery and all that, and I didn't notice it when I was recording it, and then when I got done to watch it, it looked terrible. So one of the things that I do every week when I record this is I also record it on Ustream. So I got the Ustream producer software over here. One button broadcasts it to you fine folks, and the other button allows me to record it on my Ustream account. And I do that every week just for giggles, just to have it up there. And turns out it saved me, because then I could take that recording, I could download it, and that's what last week's recording was. So it's not quite as high a quality, but the frame rate was better. I kind of watched the two side by side, and I like the Ustream one better. So that was the video problem for this week. I've got the new webcam hooked up, and I know that because I tore everything down yesterday to go to San Antonio, but I hooked everything up. Everything's good. So the quality, the shine on my forehead, the little marks I have on my cheek from when I had the chickenpox a couple years ago should all be showing up in glaring color. And that's a good reminder for those of you that download the audio version of this. There are video versions of it, should you want to stress your eyes. You can go to toddklindt.com/netcast, and there are links on the side to subscribe to the video versions of this. You have been warned. Okay, so on to the SharePoint topics. Got a couple of pretty fun things to talk about this week. The first one is probably all the patches that came out this last week. Lord mercy, did a lot of patches come out here in the last couple of weeks, and so I thought you folks would like to hear about all those patches. So I blogged a bunch of them. I got at least one more blog post coming about a couple of these things, but we'll start at the top here. So the first set of patches was the first update to SharePoint 2013, came out on Tuesday, March 12th, 2013. It's interesting that everywhere in the documentation this is never called a cumulative update. I can only assume that's because there were no updates before it to accumulate. But it's just the March 2013 update. That's all that it is. And as always, so it puts you at build 15.0.4481, and you're saying to yourself, my goodness, I can't keep all of these build numbers straight. This makes no sense. Fortunately, you can go to my website and go up at the top. There's a SharePoint 2013 build post, and that URL is www.toddklindt.com/sp2013builds. And Jeff in the chat room mentioned and noticed that they call this a public update as opposed to a cumulative update, which also makes me wonder about the private updates. What don't I get to see? But anyway, this patch came out on March 12th, and there were patches for SharePoint Foundation, SharePoint Server, and Project Server. And much like SharePoint 2010, you only need the one patch for what you have. So if you have Foundation, obviously you only patch Foundation. If you have Server, you only have to put the Server patch on. You don't have to put the Foundation patch on too. And then Project Server, you don't have to put SharePoint Server and SharePoint Foundation. So all of that is out there. Couple of notes with this though. They were pretty clear in all three of those patches that this patch will be required for all subsequent patches. So you have to put the March 2013 public update on SharePoint 2013 if you want to put any other patches on. And I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to guess that you do want to put subsequent patches on. So normally when I'm telling folks about patches, I say don't put it on unless there's something that you need fixed. This is one of those that you're probably going to need to put on. But of course, be responsible about this. Put it in a test environment, kick it around for a couple of weeks or a month, and then schedule some, a maintenance window or something for production, and get that out there. Every one of these posts or every one of these patches also had a note about how to patch the search service, essentially, and there's a link in the blog or in the knowledge base article that says go here to find out about it, and then it just sends you to the SharePoint blog. It doesn't send you to a post. So there's a specific post, and I've got it in my blog post, that walks you through patching the box with search on it, and basically having you shut all of search down and stop the timer job service and all that before you run the update. I will tell you, I've put this update on 2 VMs, and I've not done that on either one of them, and search has seemed to have been pretty happy regardless, but you should probably follow their instructions. So what other things did I have? So all that. So a couple of things, and I've got I've got some notes to put on my build page that I haven't put yet about this patch. One of them, I've installed it on a couple of boxes, like I said, and one of the things that I've noticed both times, and somebody on my blog mentioned it too, is that the Business Connectivity Services database doesn't seem to upgrade. So, and this is mostly just like SharePoint 2010. You can put the patch on and SharePoint will still run. And if you go into upgrade, the upgrade tab in Central Admin, review database status, you'll see that they'll almost always be running, database is running in compatibility mode, upgrade recommended. So that tells you that the binaries, the bits, are newer than the databases. But the bits are cool with it. They can run with old databases, but you want to upgrade them. So on one of my boxes, I kind of played around a little bit. There is an upgrade SP content database commandlet, so I upgraded a couple of my content databases. And then there's also a commandlet for upgrading search, and I ran that just to see what it did. Everything looked good. And then I ran the configuration wizard, and in both farms and 2 times in one farm, the Business Connectivity Services database never upgraded. So I go back in, and all the databases show no action required, except BCS, which shows databases running in compatibility mode. And then somebody on my blog had the same experience. So there might be something to that. Pay attention to that. Now, what I can't tell you is that I don't know if that breaks anything, though, because I didn't have any BCS stuff defined on either of those boxes. So I can't tell if putting the patch on and the database going into compatibility mode has broken anything. My VMs are pretty simple for admin stuff. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other things later that I play with on there, but I really don't have a lot of stuff really fleshed out like BCS. Another thing is on one of my farms, the Managed Metadata Service app won't run. It starts, it looks like it's there, but it doesn't work. And I don't know if the patch did that because I wasn't doing anything with managed metadata before this, so I don't know if it worked before or not. So kind of the moral of that particular story is when you test these patches, make sure you test it on an environment that's somewhat representative of the actual environment it's going to be on. Check things beforehand, make sure BCS is working, make sure managed metadata is working, and all that. Another thing is one of the things that's been added, we got 3 new PowerShell commandlets with this patch, and they all deal with app domains. And this is one of those, this is the thing where when you create your, for your SharePoint apps, you need to create a DNS domain for them to be hosted out of. Pre-March update, you had one app domain for your entire farm, and every web app used the same app domain. Now with that March update, you can assign specific app domains to a specific web application. I'll be honest, I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but it's now an option, and you've got 3 PowerShell commandlets like new app domain and set and get or something. I forget what they are, but they all deal with that. So check those out. So that was the first patch, the public patch for SharePoint 2013. A couple of weeks ago, another patch came out that I wanted to talk about, but this one's got some weirdness to it, and I haven't got all the weirdness documented yet, so I didn't want to talk about it until I did that. But the Workflow Manager for SharePoint 2013, also previously known as the Azure Workflow Service and a couple other names, that got patched 2 weeks ago, I think, 3 weeks ago maybe. They snuck a patch out for that. And that one's a little weird for a couple of reasons. Number one, so the Workflow Manager, let's take a step back. The Workflow Manager is a free product that sits on top of SharePoint 2013, and it adds more workflow options. So SharePoint 2013 out of the box does all the SharePoint 2010 workflow stuff. So if you've got workflows in your SharePoint 2010 content databases, you bolt them up to your SharePoint 2013 farm, they all work. Everything's good to go. The Workflow Manager, or the Azure Workflows, is something extra that you install either on a SharePoint server or not, doesn't matter. You install it, configure it, and it adds another set of workflow options, the SharePoint 2013 workflow options. Now, and so it's my opinion that every SharePoint farm, SharePoint 2013 farm, should have the Workflow Manager service running. And like I said, you can run it on a SharePoint server, so you don't have to worry about, well, it costs me more boxes and more licenses. You can throw it on your service app server, something like that, and it's good to go. So if you have that, and you should have that, it got a patch a couple of weeks ago. And the thing that's weird about this patch is when you install the Workflow Manager, you have this little package installer and all that, it installs something called the service bus, but it's all part of the install. When it comes to this patch, they get patched separately, and you have to patch the service bus first and then patch the workflow service, which again is not intuitive because you didn't install them separately, so you don't think to patch them separately. Excuse me, but you do need to patch them separately. So that's one bit of the weirdness. The other bit of the weirdness is the version numbers. Now, you guys know that I've got these build pages that I'm awfully proud of and all that. So when this came out, I wanted to add the workflow and service bus versions to my builds pages so I could put all the patches and the stuff there. And I'll talk to you guys about that in a minute. But I couldn't find any easy way to figure out what version of anything was running. So for the farm, I can do get sp farm, blah, blah, build version, and that gives it to me. With the workflow, the knowledge base article gave me a build number. It gave me what I was building up to, but I couldn't find anywhere what the RTM version was. So I spent a bunch of time poking around and doing a bunch of PowerShell, and the only way I could figure out to determine the version of workflow that I was running was just from the file version of the binaries. I mean, right down to, to the DLLs. There was no way to get it in PowerShell that I could see. There was no way to get it into the interface. And so using PowerShell, I got the file version of the binary, and that gave me the version. Now for the workflow, that gave me the version for RTM 1.0.20922. You don't have to remember all that. There's not going to be a quiz. I'm like, all right, that's cool. That's pretty cool. And then I started reading through there, and I'm like, oh, I need to patch the service bus too. So I start looking around for that. Again, I can't find the version for that anywhere. So I start doing the same thing. And I find its version number in its DLLs, and it is 2.0.20922. So it's exactly the same minor numbers, but workflow is version 1, and service bus is version 2. Interesting. So I put the patch on, and it patches service bus, and it patches the workflow service, and then I go check all these versions, and now workflow is version 1.0.30207, and the service bus is 2.0.30207. And to make matters more confusing, in the service bus article, I'm pretty sure, let me double check this, it quotes the version and says that it will be the 1. Whatever. So that's when things got confusing. That's why I haven't blogged it yet, because I don't know which version it's supposed to be, but I know what version it is when I go out and look at the DLLs. So that one I need to look into a little bit. But those patches are out there, the workflow and the service bus, and I've got them in that blog post. Do service bus first, and then do workflow. I will say in one farm that I did, the workflow patch didn't work the first time. It failed. I just rebooted and tried it again. It worked like a champ. So you definitely get those on there. The Workflow Manager knowledge base article talks about what that fixes. So if you're having any kind of workflow issues, check that out. So the third thing that gets patched last week was the Office web apps. So kind of a recap. The Office web apps in SharePoint 2013 have to be on a different box, and so this is patching that box. And the patching process for the Office web apps is absolutely not anything like any other patching process at all. As a matter of fact, it's really just the reinstall. It uninstalls and it reinstalls, and you have to recreate your farm and reconnect to your farm, and it's just like starting all over again. So when you do that, before you try to patch this yourself, you need to read a couple of knowledge base articles. Well, actually just one blog post. Victor Weiland in Sweden has a blog post on how to patch the Office web apps with no downtime, which you may or may not have to worry about, but he walks through the entire patching process. So read through that. It's not intuitive at all. It doesn't run at all the way that you think it's going to. So read Victor's blog post before you try to install that patch. Now, one cool, super cool thing that comes in that patch is they have added the ability to view PDF files now with the Office web apps. The Word viewer now supports PDF files. So that's cool, but one thing you got to be careful of is you need to tell SharePoint about that. So if you remember when you installed the Office web apps, you set up, you did the new WAPI client, Dealio stuff, and bolted everything together, you need to run an additional command to say, hey SharePoint, when you get PDF files, send them to the Office web apps too. That's in Victor's next blog post that you should read. I have not installed that one yet, but I will hopefully this week and get that going. So lots of patches for everything. SharePoint, Office web apps, and workflow. Test them first. I've had a couple little hinky things happen with the SharePoint patch and with the workflow patch, so make sure you do that in a test environment. Now, I mentioned that I was going to add these to my builds page, and I have not yet. And I think the way that I'm going to add them is I think I'm going to have the table up top that has all the SharePoint builds, and then a second table underneath it that has the non-SharePoint things, but the things that SharePoint administrators care about. And that's where the Office web apps will be, and the Workflow Manager patches too. So look for that change to the SP 2010 or 2013 builds thing. Also, you can follow me on Twitter. I have an SP 2013 patches Twitter account where I when I tweet this kind of stuff. So check that out. If you put any of those 3 patches on and have good experiences, bad experiences, whatever, please do tweet me or go out to my blog and leave a comment, because a bunch of other people are going to be looking there. If you've got a story to tell, I would love to give you a platform for telling that. So and Mark Christman in the chat room took a PowerShell class, and I posted the PowerShell for getting the file version, and he understood it. So good going, Mark number 1. Mark number 1. Way to go. So speaking of PowerShell, and this one I have to give a shout out to. So I've been talking about the search thing. And I don't have Twitter open, but apparently someone's talking about it in Twitter, and I can't see it because I don't have Twitter on this box. But I'll jump in and get that. So shout out goes to, or I want to send a shout out to Lori Gowan for this next one. Last week, Rackspace did a bunch of free SharePoint 2013 webinars, and I decided I normally do an install one, and that one we've done that one a bunch, and it's okay. So I want to do something different. And so instead of doing an install one, I just kind of decided to do a PowerShell freeform one. So I had like 6 slides and then just did PowerShell. I came up with 3 or 4 scenarios. And I was talking to some friends, and I said, hey, what situations do you want me to try to explain how to fix with PowerShell, or just what things go on do you think I should try to do? Because I was trying to give some applicable PowerShell tips that people could take back and use. And so Lori mentioned that she had a customer that had a bunch of file versions, and we've all done this. We've been doing this dance since SharePoint 2007. That you get a document library that has versioning enabled, but there's no maximum number of versions defined, and so you get 150 versions of that 100 meg PowerPoint file. So the obvious solution is to go, oh my God, I should have set a maximum number of versions, but that doesn't, when you set that for the library, it doesn't remove all the extra versions. Normally what you need to do is go back to every file and upload another version, and then that truncates the extra ones. So that's not very feasible. So she said, hey, if you could take care of that with PowerShell, that would be cool. I'd never looked at it before with PowerShell, but sure, what the heck. So I did, and I got it figured out. And so there will be a blog post coming on that. But essentially what the PowerShell that I wrote does is it walks through, and right now I've just got it going to a specific library because I'm a little nervous of starting a process that will walk through and then delete a bunch of stuff. I get a little nervous about that, especially if I write it. But you give it a document library, it looks at the maximum number of versions in that document library, and then it walks through every item to find the items that have more versions than that. And if a document does, then it deletes all of the versions that are more than that. So in my webinar that I did, I had a document that had 7 versions. I set the library to 2 versions, ran my PowerShell, and it and it deleted the other 5 versions, so there's only 2. So I need to test that a little bit more. I need to build in some logic for minor versions and all that kind of stuff. But just one of those things where, you know, if you can dream it, PowerShell can probably do it. And so that was good. So that blog post will be coming at some point. And if that's something that you end up enjoying, thank Lori Gowan for that. So there were a couple of things in the chat room that I wanted to talk about. So Doug mentions that Victor's PDF preview. So, and I haven't followed this because I haven't put all the Office web app versions up yet, but it looks like the PDF viewing functionality actually came in a patch before the March update, and so Victor's got a link to a KB article from a patch in February or something that added that PDF stuff, but nobody installed it. I'd never heard anything about it. So where that came in and where it got blogged got a little confusing. So, and then Tom is saying that Doug Ware, I think on Twitter, that's the stuff that I'm missing, said that he did not stop the search stuff like that that post told him to, and search quit working, his farm went sideways, and his dog shaved his cat. So that sounds pretty damning. Sounds like we all should make sure and do that. And I can't remember my Twitter password. We all should put that, stop that search stuff. I was going to log into the Twitter webpage and I don't remember my Twitter password, so I won't be doing that. Just distract me anyway. So definitely read that, test all that. Here's another one that rears its ugly head every once in a while. Doug got my password. He's going to log in for me. Thanks, Doug. You're a heck of a guy. And so the password thing brings up an interesting point. People talk about how well I multitask with talking and reading and typing and watching all this stuff go on, and I think I do a fairly good job of keeping up, but I can't do all of that and in my head try to remember what my Twitter password is, because I'm one of those guys that's got different passwords for everything, so I don't just have the one password that unlocks it all. And so trying to remember what my Twitter password was, I can't do it. One, I do have them in some place, but I don't want to open that up right now. So that's another good question. Does the March public update slipstream? I don't know if it does. I will try that, though. That is a good question. I meant to try that and just haven't had a chance yet. Anyway, so I posted a blog post. This came up with a customer a while back, last week. They had a SharePoint 2010 site. They had opened it up for anonymous access, and for the most part that was working, but some stuff didn't work. There was stuff that anonymous folks were supposed to be able to do, but they just couldn't do. Couldn't add, I can't remember what it was specifically they couldn't do. And I said, oh, I know what that is. That is the lockdown mode in SharePoint 2010. So that link that I put in the chat room talks about the lockdown mode. The lockdown mode is something that comes with a publishing portal in SharePoint 2007 and SharePoint 2010, and it's a security measure that keeps anonymous folks out of some places in SharePoint. And by default, it's turned on with the publishing portal. And so that blog post has a couple of pieces of PowerShell. It's a feature you can disable. But if you find yourself in a position where anonymous folks should be able to do something, and you've just flat out given anonymous folks access to something and they can't get to it, check this lockdown mode. And if you just go out and search, Bing or Google, SharePoint lockdown mode, it will show you how to unset that. But that one's nailed me a couple of times, especially as a guy like me who's got his blog running on SharePoint. I forget this one all the time. And finally, this was kind of a breath of fresh air, something that we have all suspected, but now it's nice to have it confirmed. Microsoft released a knowledge base article that flat out says if your web application does not have a root site collection, it is not supported unless they're all hostname site collections. And this is something that we have known for a while. It was the case with SharePoint 2003 and SharePoint 2007 and SharePoint 2010, that there are just some things in SharePoint that don't work if you don't have a site collection at the root. Now, most places did not get into that situation on purpose, though I did have it happen a couple of times where a company didn't want something at portal.contoso.com. And I can't for the life of me remember their rationale. I was probably laughing too hard when they tried to explain it to me. But there are a bunch of things inside of SharePoint that need to get at SharePoint services and JavaScript files and resources and all kinds of stuff. And so they just default to the root of a web app. And if there's no site collection there, then those things aren't published and everything fails. Trevor Seward in the chat room, he actually blogged this. He was the one where I saw it come up. But he mentions InfoPath forms, server, Excel services, things like that. I first noticed it when I was doing an upgrade, I think from 2007 to 2010, I forget. But if you don't upgrade the root site collection first and try to do other ones, then a bunch of stuff fails because there's no root there because you haven't upgraded it yet. So every nice link there, Lori. Every web app has to have a root site collection, and you got to. That's a little better, yes. And if you don't do that, things will break. But not only will they break, but Microsoft will just flat out not support you. So we've got that. It looks like search is one of those things. I will be honest, Lori, I didn't have a chance to read this blog post before. Yep, looks like that's the case. So search is apparently one of those things. So always have that. On a related note, and this is something that I've gotten a couple of times here in the last week, is that when you set up your app domain, so we talked about with the patch that you can have multiple app domains now with the new patch. When you're setting up your app domain, so this is the whole, your content sitting at contoso.com, but your SharePoint apps are at contosoapps.com. Wherever that DNS entry points to, whatever that resolves to, must be SharePoint. So I've had a couple of customers in the last week now point it to their SharePoint server, which is so close. But if they don't have host headers, then that Contoso apps request ends up going to the default IIS zone, which doesn't know a lick about SharePoint. And when the Contoso apps tries to send in some SharePointy stuff to get SharePointy stuff out, the default the default IIS site goes, what? And then they get a nasty gram in their browser and everybody's mad. So you have to point that at an IIS website that's been extended with SharePoint. So do that with host headers or stop the default IIS site or something, but you have to get SharePoint with that or all of your SharePoint apps will fail. Everything will be broken. Doug in the chat room asks, do people usually delete the default IIS site? Heavens, no, I hope not. Goodness gracious. In all seriousness, I did that once. I deleted the default IIS website, and I mean, this was probably Windows 2003. Man, does IIS get mad if you do that. Holy cow. And it didn't get mad right away, but it got mad when I unextended SharePoint, and then there were like no sites in IIS, and wow, but again, I probably haven't done this in like 8 or 10 years, but my advice to people is maybe stop the default site so that you can put a SharePoint site on 80 with no host header, but I would never delete that. So yeah, I would leave that alone. So I think we have another Mark join the chat room. I think all of the Marks are going to join the chat room right now. Let's get them all in here. Trevor is saying in IIS 7 or greater it's okay. Yeah, it might be the case. I might be afraid to just the same. And Jeff is saying in the chat room that he likes to leave the default IIS site but put it on something other than 80. So that's cool too. Then it won't catch traffic and it's still running and all that. But man, I got burnt by that once. And I think I had to uninstall IIS and reinstall it to get everything back. Pretty nasty. Doug says he deletes them. Doug, that's because you're a developer and you don't live by society's rules. That's it. Yes, nothing bad has happened yet. All right, so that is most of what we've got. So we're going to do a little bit of promotion here. I got today, so I turned in my last chapters for the Professional SharePoint 2013 Administration book. Chapters have been turned in. Author reviews have been turned in. So today I got a couple of page reviews. So this is after I've written the chapter, after they've slashed it and ripped out all of my jokes and just pulled the heart and soul out of my chapter, and I've had to argue to get it back. Then they send us a PDF version of what the book's going to look like. So it's got everything formatted, and then we have to read through that. So I've got 3 of those left, and then 1 more coming, and then I think I'm done with the book. So we're getting really close now. I think a bunch of the chapters are already off to the printers and doing the thing that they do. So Hean in the chat room is saying that he's already pre-ordered the book. High five, Hean. Appreciate that. You will also be able to pre-order them. No, you won't be able to pre-order them. You'll be able to order them off of my website once they're around. I will be selling signed copies of the book. For now, I will assume that they're going to be cover price. I don't know exactly how much I'm going to be getting them from Wiley. I need to figure that out. And then I need to, shipping them is not going to be cheap. Those things are like 3.5 pounds. And so I need to figure out how much it's going to cost to ship them. But if you're in the U.S., and maybe Canada, you'll be able to buy one off of my website. I'll sign it. I'll write things in there. I'm also trying to see if I can sell the un-DRM'd digital copies. That looks a little goofy from what they've explained to me. I need to talk to them about that too. But I kind of want to put that in the same place that I put free advice. If you bought that, you got the PDF version. I want to put it up there too. But we'll see what they're going to say about that. But hopefully in a month or so, you'll be able to get that in your grubby little hands and read it and love it and all that. Will I be able to do it for Australia as well? I'm guessing no. I don't know how to ship things to Australia without it costing me a lot of money. So we'll figure something out. We'll figure something out. So that's coming out, and I'm very excited. Yeah, so in the U.S., we had a thing called the Pony Express. So maybe in Australia, you're going to have the Kangaroo Express. You need to figure something out. He said yes on Twitter. If it's on Twitter, it's true. We'll figure it out. So we got the book coming. I'm super excited to get that thing out the door and be done with that one. Second, I don't have a lot of details yet, but pay attention to my blog. I might potentially be doing another SharePoint thinger at some point, another conference. I might be making another public appearance somewhere. Hopefully in the next few days I'll have some details on that, but stick to my blog, update that, and when I have enough information that I know that it's going to happen, I'll put it out there. But this will be pretty cool. I'm kind of excited about this. I hope it pans out. But while we're waiting to see if that pans out, I will be at TechEd North America and also in Madrid. And so if you're going to be in either one of those conferences, come find me. I'm not sure exactly what all sessions I'm going to be doing, but definitely come find me in New Orleans or in Madrid. So I think that's it for tonight. I didn't go horribly over, although I've lost all my windows to see what time it is. I went a little over. But thanks to everybody in the chat room. You asked some great questions. I've got a bunch of homework that I did not write down, so I will probably never do it. But thanks to those questions. Thanks to the people who submitted things in the chat room. And next week we should be on the regular time, so I'll see you all at 8:30. Don't forget to check me out on YouTube at youtube.com/ToddKlindtNetcast, on Twitter at Todd Klindt, email todd.klint@rackspace.com, all that fun stuff. So thanks, everybody. Have a good night, and I will see you next week.